Okay, so let's get started. In this video, we're going to cover two big topics that are really interconnected. Think of this as kind of the precursor to the Civil War. The two topics are slavery, hence the big bubble up there, and over here, Western expansion. All right, this is big stuff right here, and I know there's a lot written on the board, but I'm going to try and sort it out and just make it as simple as possible. Keep in mind, this is a skeletal outline. It's not going to have every detail. I'm skipping a lot of big names, a lot of little events and things like that. Make sure you go over your notes. That's really, really important, but hopefully this will help you study a little bit. So let's get started. Slavery. So what's the deal with it? Why is slavery the thing that's really putting Americans on edge? Why is it going to drive us to the point of civil war? Well, there's a whole lot of issues around it. First of all, we have cotton, sort of the economic incentives behind slavery. We have what it's like to be a slave, sort of slave life. That's really important. We have all the laws and compromises right up there that, are going to affect the issue of slavery. We have the abolitionists that are, sorry, it's hard to point on this because it's all backwards. We have the abolitionists up there, and those are the people who are going to fight to free slaves. We also have the justification for slavery right over there. All important stuff. We're going to go over it all and kind of put together a picture of what slavery was like at the time and all the implications behind it. So let's get started with cotton. Okay, cotton is going to be the big cash crop in the South. It's going to be the thing that's really going to drive the economy down there, and it's also going to drive sort of slave culture. Keep in mind, though, it's not just cotton. There's other stuff, too. We also have rice, sugar, tobacco. All of this stuff is going to be incredibly labor-intensive, and it's really going to promote sort of that slave culture. A couple things to remember, though. The area that really takes to cotton is part of what's called the Deep South. Now, what's the Deep South? Now, think of those states, Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi. There's going to be what's called the Black Belt, which is going to stretch basically from Louisiana to Georgia, and it's this extraordinarily rich soil that's perfect in terms of climate and environment for the cotton. So, cotton is just going to explode in this area. And the fact is, because it's a labor-intensive crop, there's going to be a great deal of slavery surrounding cotton. So at this time, about, around the 19th century, textiles are going to be booming across Europe and also in the north of the United States. Textile factories in England and France and up north. Thus, there's going to be a humongous demand for cotton. This is before Egypt and other countries started to really get into the crop. That's going to mean there's going to be a lot of money to be made in cotton. Now, because there is no free labor competition, you're just relying on slave labor, which has a minimal means of production cost. Basically, the owner of the means of production is going to make humongous profits, and that's really what's going to drive slavery the most. There is incredible money to be made in cotton. So, it's going to get to such an extent, as a matter of fact, that the South is basically going to become a monoculture. Monoculture is an important word. You should definitely know it. Monoculture means a culture that revolves around one thing. That's going to be cotton for the South, and by extension, slavery. Slavery is going to be that sort of central identifying factor in the South. Really important stuff. Okay, now we're going to move on. Let's see if I can adjust this. Nope, over here would probably be better. Okay, we're going to move on to slave life. All right, so Dr. Stoll spent a great deal of time on slave life, so it's probably going to be on the exam in some form. I would probably expect a few things to be mentioned in the essays from this sort of slave life section. I'm going to go over some of the big points of it. All right, first of all, we have what's called the myth of Tara. Tara is from a movie called Gone with the Wind. I'm sure not everybody's seen it now. But basically Tara was this kind of idealistic plantation. And, you know, everybody's in big, beautiful gowns and there's balls and all this sort of stuff. But it also portrays slavery in a certain way where it's not really that bad. There's this sort of mutual love between the slave and the master. This is where we get, you know, Mammy, you know, who's always by, you know, her mistress' side and the master's side and all that sort of stuff. And it's a myth. It's just not true. The reality of slavery is much darker than what Gone with the Wind would have us believe. Here's the reality of slave life. The first thing is, well, let's sum it up in one word. It sucks. Slavery life, it just sucks all around. First thing that sucks is cotton. Picking cotton is extremely labor intensive. Because it's such a low plant, people are going to be bent down constantly, which is brutal on the back. Imagine spending hours and hours every day of your life constantly bent over tending this little unfortunate plant. It can be agonizing on the mind and the body. Another thing is the separation of families. This is really going to get under abolitionist skin. Because slaves were such an incredible commodity, especially after the ban on the importation of slaves in 1808, slaves are going to be constantly bought and sold, and it doesn't really matter if there's family ties or not, because we're talking about property, not human beings. So a lot of times you would have children separated from mothers or husbands separated from wives. This is going to drive abolitionists crazy, and it's also going to make life really psychologically terrible for a lot of slaves. Another thing we have is this idea that there's little to no hope for freedom. The fact is, you're born into this. This is all you know is slavery. All around you are white people, and there's just not much hope for freedom. This isn't the same thing as being an indentured servant, where after a couple of years you can earn your freedom, and there's not much opportunity to make money to buy yourself out. Thus, it's very, very rare to actually see slaves being let free. Another thing is, of course, what I call the whip, which is all the punishment, the cruelty, being whipped, being tortured in a number of ways. It's going to be constant. Now, think movies like 12 Years a Slave. I know that's a particularly brutal portrayal, but that's very much what it was like. We're talking about a time when we're treating slaves like animals, basically. It's seen like putting an animal in line in the same way a dog would misbehave. You would beat it. You would beat a slave. Really, really brutal stuff here. Another thing to mention under this sort of slave life category is what's called slave mentality. Slave mentality is kind of this idea that the only reason you're working is out of the fear of punishment. Okay, now that's a powerful idea. You don't want to get whipped. You don't want to get hurt, but that's going to make you work just hard enough to get by. Let's face facts. If your life is nothing but work, you're not going to want to overwork yourself. What's the incentive to work extra, extra hard? You're only going to get more work if you're proved to be an extra hardworking guy. There's no reward for that. Now, that's going to lead to sort of this attitude by some slaves to act dumb or work slow, because if you act dumb, then you're going to not have the master riding on you quite as hard. If you're just being disobedient, saying, I don't want to work today, you're going to get a beating. But if you act like you don't quite understand, or you work just a little bit slower, I mean, you're not going to get punished for that. You're just going to do just enough to get by. Now, the reason we mention this is because this may very well be the root of racism. There's going to be this idea that black folks are lazy and don't work very hard. And a lot of people believe that this is where it stems from, this initial, very real attitude that slaves often implemented into their work. Okay? Another question that I want to address, because it may very well be an essay question, is why did slaves not revolt? There are going to be a few little revolts, but they're going to be disastrous, and they're going to lead to massive, massive executions of the slaves who were involved. But there's three big reasons that Dr. Stoll went over. This is going to be in this section right here. First of all, there's few first-generation slaves. That means that in places like the New Spain, like in South America or in the Caribbean, you get a lot of new first-generation slaves, people who are right off the boat from Africa. They have tasted freedom, and when you've tasted freedom, you're going to want it a lot more. You don't know what you don't know what you got till it's gone. That sort of old mentality. In South America, you're going to have maroon communities and palanques. These are escaped, slaved communities happening constantly. We're going to have major revolts in the Caribbean. Haiti's the big example. This just doesn't happen in America. Well, a lot of that's attributed to the fact that we have second, third, fourth generation slaves. They've never experienced freedom. This is the only life that they know. So it makes things much more difficult in terms of sort of rallying people for support. The other thing, we also have nowhere to run to. This is one of the unfortunate realities of being in the Deep South. Let's say you're in southern Alabama and you want to escape. Where are you going to escape to? You're going to have to go through Alabama and then Tennessee, and hopefully nobody's going to catch you. You are in a white world where everyone is on the same page about race. And you're probably going to you're going to look like a slave when you're running away. It's going to be very, very hard to make it up north. And if you get caught, God help you, because you're going to get whipped brutally or maybe even put to death. It's a tough world. The other thing, and this is a really important point, whites have all the power, and that's in terms of laws and the big one, guns. Whites have guns. Let's face facts. If you don't have guns, you're just not going to get much done in terms of revolutions. Really important stuff right there. Definitely keep it in mind. Let's move up here to the justification of slavery. I apologize. The light's on it real bad, but let's see if I can. No, there's not much I can do. But I'll go over that, and I'll just read it out to you. People in the South are not just going to say, hey, we like slavery because it makes a lot of money. They're going to justify it through other means. The big one is biblical support. The Bible has slavery in it, cover to cover. Okay? Whether we're talking about the story of Ham, or the book of Philemon, or that classic quote, slaves, obey your masters, it's a reality that the Bible very much acknowledges. Now, there's going to be a lot of controversy on what it exactly says on it being right or wrong, but a lot of people in the South are going to use that for justification of slavery. Another thing is this idea called paternalism. Paternalism is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I know it can be a little bit confusing, but here's how you should think of it. Think of fathers, the father figure who kind of reigns over the house, and he watches after his children and protects his wife. It's sort of this idealistic image of this male leader. Now think of that in terms of society. Think of it in terms of white people and black people. You have the white male master, and you have the sort of childlike, less intelligent, less superior black people who the white master is sort of guiding through life. There's this idea that black people need to be guided, that white people are superior in every way, and they have to be watched after. Incredibly racist, but a reality of the period. Finally, there's this idea of sort of staying away from this industrialized concept of America. Now you got to remember, up north we got loads of factories and manufacturing plants popping up all over the place, and it's kind of destroying this idealistic Republican American that people like Thomas Jefferson like to talk about. Not so in the South. We still have that agrarian nation that's built upon agriculture and, you know, your own land and being sufficient, you know. It's American to own slaves. It's how we can be the nation that our founding fathers wanted. So it's kind of this anti-industrial complex that can sometimes go around. And it was something that was very much talked about, what it means to be a real American, and sometimes slavery goes right with that, as shocking as that may be. Now, let's move over to the other side of the coin, okay? If you look up there, we have a little section on abolitionists, okay? Who are the abolitionists? Well, they're the people who want to get slavery out of there. They're going to be extremely influential. They're going to be causing all kinds of problems all over the place. You should also note that they tend to be very, very religious. They really look at slavery as being wrong from two perspectives. The first one, again, the religious thing emphasized, slavery is sinful, straight up. This is, again, churches are divided on this issue. They can't solve this issue of slavery. A lot of churches are going to straight up divide because of this. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, is going to flat out say slavery is evil. But also, if you look at the Bible, I mean, just think about the Jews escaping slavery in Egypt. There's evidence for both sides of the coin there. The other thing is they're going to say free labor is superior to slave labor. You remember how earlier I was talking about the slave mentality, about, hey, just getting enough done to get the work to not get beat, They say that is inherently bad for business. You should be you should have an incentive to work. You should want to get more money, to get promoted, to work your way up a ladder. Free labor is good for capitalist society. They're really going to push this in debates where religion really isn't at the forefront. They're going to push this sort of economic idea because, remember, we're dealing with this reality that slavery is profitable, extremely profitable. And the North is going to have to sort of show that it can be superior economically. Really important point to note. Now, the abolitionists are going to want to solve this issue of slavery, and they propose a couple of solutions that are really important. You should definitely know them. The first one is the colony of Liberia. This is going to be a little part of Africa where Northerners are going to offer to send slaves to just sort of start their own new society. It's not really going to work. It's basically, Liberia is nothing like America. You get thrown into it and just start a society with not much at all. And a lot of slaves aren't going to want to leave America. That's where their family is, and it's the place they know. Remember, these are second, third, fourth generation slaves. This is not a first generation place that wants to get back to their roots in Africa. So that's not really going to work out, but there are other solutions. A moderate sort of solution is this idea of slow emancipation. Some of the abolitionists are going to believe in this. This is this idea that over time, we gradually free the slaves, like have an age limit. When somebody becomes 30, they can be set free, and farmers will be compensated for their slaves. It's a more reasonable sort of solution to the issue of slavery, but it's not really going to take hold. Then you have sort of the radical ideas. These are the people who really want to stop slavery. It's a matter of us needing to cleanse ourselves before God. We need to free the slaves now, and those farmers who've been living in sin, they don't get any compensation whatsoever. Now, you got to remember, the entire North it's not like the whole North is abolitionists. This is actually a minority, but they're a very, very vocal minority. And when you're screaming things out like, free all the slaves now and don't compensate any of those simple farmers, that's scary stuff. So the fact is, abolitionists really aren't liked that much. People are afraid of them. And rightly so. They're going to do a lot of stuff that is considered radical and even dangerous, to the point of even starting little revolts. Definitely need to look into your notes to get some of the specifics on those. Really, really cool instances there. So let's move on to these slave laws and compromises. Now, this is really, really important stuff. If you're going to focus on one part of this video, you should focus here. All right? The very first one, this is really, really important. We have the importation of slavery ban in 1808. Okay? This is something that the Founding Fathers set in place. They said, hey, we'll allow the importation of slaves for a while, but we're going to cut it off in 1808. This is going to be huge. It's going to create a labor shortage for slaves, and it's also going to make the price of slaves soar up. I mean, really, really soar up. To have a slave is an extraordinary luxury. We're just going to see the price go up and up and up. Pretty soon, only the rich are going to have slaves, and it's going to make the idea of slaves as property even more important, because buying and selling slaves is going to be big, big business. It's also going to promote things like separating slaves from their families, because the fact is you can make a lot of money off of it. Now, I'm going to stop right there and move on to another subject, and then we're going to come back to the laws of compromises, because this is really, really important stuff, and I want to put it in the appropriate context. We're going to move over here to Western expansion. Okay, Western expansion is kind of like manifest destiny. It's this idea that we've got to move west, we've got to expand, we've got to make this country an American civilized land, not just this wilderness that's all over the place. So where does it all start? How do people get out there? Well, first of all, we have all this territory from the Louisiana Purchase, and we have territory that's going all the way to Oregon, but it's wild and it's uncontrolled. Who's going to go out there? Well, we have the fur traders. We're going to have fur traders who are going to explore the area. They're kind of think of like mountain men like Jeremiah Johnson and stuff like that. They're going to explore the area, get furs, and they're going to set up things like trading posts. And they're also going to be guides for folks who come a little bit later, people who want to settle down and actually build towns and have a more civilized existence. They're going to be extremely important figures in American history and in American culture and folklore. Really, really cool stuff there. Also, you need to keep in mind that the Indians have basically been pushed completely out of this area. We just keep pushing them further and further west. They're no longer a threat. Indians have almost reached the point of complete defeat by the white man at this point. They're being pushed out of this land entirely, which means, hey, white folks, you can come out here and you're not going to be attacked by Indians like you were back then. So that's going to be a really big invitation for folks to move out. But something else happened, something else that's really, really important. We have the war with Mexico, which is right over there. Okay? War with Mexico. Still didn't spend much time on this. It's a really important war, but I'm just going to mention a couple key things from it. Refer to your notes for a little bit more information on it, because there is important stuff. A lot of the generals, some of the battles are interesting. How it got started is interesting. But here's the important thing. America wins big, really, really big. We kind of whooped up on Mexico. We're going to get everything from the Rio Grande all the way to California. So a huge chunk of land. It's like another Louisiana Purchase, basically. So think California, Utah, New Mexico, all of this land we're going to get, and we got to do something with it. We have to decide, how are we going to settle it? How are we going to make money off of it? And most importantly of all, is it going to be free land or slave land? So keep that in mind. All this stuff, all this territory, we got to do something with it. So let's talk about a few of them. We got Oregon right there, okay? Oregon's a really interesting state, extremely resource rich. We got timber, we got incredible fishing, and we have some excellent farmland. People are going to be really, really enticed by Oregon. We're going to get things like the Oregon Trail as people start to pour towards it. Something important to remember, it's split between the United States and England. That's not going to be as big of an issue as you might think. England gets the north, America gets the south, but everybody wants one thing, Puget Sound, the Seattle area. It's an extraordinary port. Everybody wants it. That's where the money is going to be flowing into. England has it at first, but they just can't keep up with American population numbers. We're just going to flood Oregon with all kinds of people, and we're eventually going to push England out, and they can't hold on to it, and we're going to get Seattle and Puget Sound. It's going to be made a state in 1859, so right before the Civil War gets underway. And it's going to come into the Union as a free state, which makes sense because we have the Missouri Compromise. It's going to be north of that line. Okay. We also got Texas. Texas, really, everybody should be pretty familiar with it. What we have is this territory before the Mexican War, and Mexico, nobody really is living in it. It's kind of barren. It's kind of like Lubbock, and they invite Americans to come and become Mexican citizens and live in the area. So a lot of Americans get excited by this and they come out there, but there's a couple of things you have to do. You have to convert to Catholicism. You have to trade with Mexico, and no slavery in Texas. Americans say, cool, that's fine. They don't do any of that. They basically ignore everything, and they settle down and kind of do things their own way. This really pisses off Mexico. There's going to be a revolt in 1835 by Texans. They're going to win the revolt, and they're going to ask to come into the Union. Not the best time to do it. There's all kinds of political reasons for it. Mainly it's the slave thing. Texas coming in, it's a slave state. So they're going to be there, an independent nation for a while. But they're going to be annexed in 1845. And they're going to come into the Union as a slave state. Okay? Another one, California. California, this is the really big one, the one that's going to affect everything, okay? California, we get it during the Mexican War. People have always had this idea that California was wasted on the Mexicans. It's this extraordinary state with beautiful views. We got beaches and great weather. If any of you have ever been to San Diego or California, it's just the perfect temperature year-round. There's also these incredible harbors of San Francisco and San Diego. Unbelievable incentives for anybody in terms of trade. So there's a lot to be said there. So when we finally got it after the Mexican War, we came out there, but it was a steady stream. Nothing too crazy. But in the 1840s, we're going to discover gold in California. Now, the word isn't really going to get out till late 1848, and by the time it does, there's going to be a massive wave of people coming to California looking for gold. The 49ers, they're called. And the population is going to absolutely explode in California. We're talking thousands and thousands of people. So before long, California is going to become a state. And it's a state that has that little line from the Missouri Compromise going right through the middle of it. So we have to decide, is California going to be a free state or a slave state? Which brings us back to these laws and compromises. So California can come as a state in 1850. But is it going to be free or slave? This is going to really divide folks. So we have what's called the Compromise of 1850. People don't really like it because both sides lose something, pro-slave and anti-slave folks. Here are the details of it, the important things you need to know, okay? Also, you should know there's a whole lot of history behind the people behind it. You know, the compromisers, the folks who put the bill together. Probably worth knowing those people, but I'm going to give you the big details you need to know from it, all right? California is a free state. That's the one thing, all right? That means no slavery in California. It doesn't matter that we got that line going through it. We're just going to make it a free state, all right? The territories, which is all that stuff we got in the Mexican War, stuff like Nebraska and Kansas at the time, Utah, New Mexico, all these guys, we're just not going to say anything about slavery or freedom. We're just going to let it be right now. We're not going to address that issue, okay? There's going to be no mention of slavery in the territories, all right? Also, we're going to say, hey, the slave trade that we have in D.C., we're going to stop that. It doesn't look good when foreign dignitaries come to the White House and they see slave auctions going on the front lawn. Finally, there's one last thing, and this is the thing that's really going to piss off folks in the North. This was put in to please the Southerners. Basically, it's what's called the Fugitive Slave Law. It's going to be right there. Fugitive Slave Law. Basically, it says slaves can be pursued in free states. So if you have an escaped slave, he runs off to, I don't know, let's say Pennsylvania, okay? You have the right to hire a bounty hunter, and they can go to that state with a description of that slave. All you needed was a little description, and you can bring them back. And the authorities in that free state have to compromise with the bounty hunters. This is going to infuriate folks up north. They're going to say this is completely unjust. It favors slave states, and it's asking free states to basically ignore all their laws on slavery that allow no slavery to happen. So definitely really important stuff right there. Some other stuff you'll see right over there. I know that's hard to read, but that says the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. This is going to come after the 1850 Compromise. Kansas-Nebraska Act, basically we have an issue. Kansas and Nebraska are both above the Missouri Compromise line, which means they should both really be free states. But that would mean the Senate would be divided. So there's this whole big issue of, hey, do we stick to the Missouri Compromise, or should we do this one-state, two-state policy? It's really tough stuff. So we take a step back and we say, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave it to democracy. We're going to have faith in popular sovereignty. We're going to let the states vote on whether they want to be free or a slave state. This is going to, in theory, it should work perfectly, but democracy doesn't work perfectly. What we get is pro-slave people and pro-freedom people from different states who come into Kansas and set up temporary towns so they can sway the vote in favor of one direction. It's going to get really dirty. And basically, we're going to, pretty soon, the people who want freedom are going to win out. They're going to set up all these little towns that are going to vote in favor of freedom. So Kansas and Nebraska both vote to be free states, but the vote is tainted. So folks aren't really sure what to do with this. So things are going to get very tense, especially in Kansas. In Kansas, we're going to get a little episode called Bleeding Kansas, which is basically where we're going to have U.S. Marshals who are going to come in and go into some of these places that are pro-freedom, and they're going to destroy these these places where they print off all the press and pamphlets for freedom and all that sort of stuff. It's not a good thing, but it's not bloody. In the press, it's going to be portrayed as being very bloody. It's going to be called the Rape of Lawrence. People are going to look at Kansas and think that war has basically broken out there, and it's going to be really nasty and really dirty, and it's kind of a little dress rehearsal for the Civil War. Folks are going to be going crazy over Kansas, and they're going to call it Bleeding Kansas because they think all this horrible stuff is happening over there. The next thing, this is the big one that I want to end on, and we're going to have to follow this little line that goes on the bottom of the board. Kind of goes way up there. Let's see if I can squeeze it in. The final big decision. You see right up here, we have Dred Scott, the Dred Scott case. This is really, really, really important. Basically, the Dred Scott case is going to be the issue before the Civil War. This is what everybody's going to be talking about. It's think of it kind of like the media obsession of the day. Dred Scott, he's a slave. He has a master who's moving around, and he eventually goes into Illinois, which is a free state, with his slave. The master's going to die, and he's going to sue the widow of the master, saying because he's in a free state, he is therefore free. It's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, a guy named Taney, he's definitely a Southerner, pro-slavery guy. Here's his decision. It's not to do with, it's more to do with one big issue, and it's this. If you're a black person, you're not automatically a citizen of the United States. It's saying the Constitution was not written in regards to black people. Now, the states have the right to give or not give rights, but constitutionally speaking, the Constitution does not apply to black people because they're not citizens. They are property. And that's kind of the big message from it. We're talking about property here, not human beings. So Basically, it nullifies the Missouri Compromise. It says, hey, because we're talking about issues of property, you cannot ban slavery just because it's a moral thing, it's a property thing. We're talking about buying and selling property, and you can't harm somebody's property just because they cross a state line. It's fundamental to the Lockean interpretation of the Constitution. Let's see what else I got up here. Also, yeah, this is an important one. You can't prohibit slavery in the territories. Flat out says that it's just you can't do it constitutionally. Here's the point. The Dred Scott case is going to completely outrage the North, especially the new Republican Party. They're going to be super angry about this. It's going to be the catalyst. It's going to launch the election just before the Civil War. It's going to put Lincoln into sort of the national limelight. Really important decision, definitely worth knowing. So I know we went over a lot of stuff in this video. As you can see, like, look at all that stuff we went over. But I hope it helps out a little bit. Here's what you need to know, okay? The important thing, know why slavery gets to be so big. Know why things are kind of ratcheting up and getting more and more tense, especially through like all the compromises and laws we talked about. Know about why Western expansion sort of played into this. And let's see, what else? Some of the justifications for slavery and some of the arguments behind the abolitionists. All this stuff is what I wanted to focus in on. Think of this as kind of like all building up to the Civil War. I'm trying to set the stage for it. So I hope that helped out. Let me know, and that'll be it. Thanks a lot.